Okay, welcome everybody to 2022. And this is our first webinar for the year for our monthly webinar schedules. I'll put a link where you can find all the other upcoming webinars that may be of interest to you. My name is Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I am the Poultry Extension Specialist at University of Kentucky. And I'm also the coordinator for the e-extension, which is the online version of the Cooperative Extension Service. And I work specifically with small and backyard flocks, so which is what our webinars target. So for the first webinar of the year, we have somebody that I met in Minnesota when I was there. Hope does a lot of, used to do a lot, well, I guess she still does a lot of animal welfare audits on commercial operations, but she also works with a lot of backyard flocks as well. Emily Shoup is another poultry specialist out at Penn State. Done a lot of work with poultry, both in industry and with backyard flocks. So a lot of people think that, you know, backyard flocks don't have to worry about animal welfare, but obviously they do. And Hope's gonna tell you all about why and what you need to look for. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can either type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring both. If the question is relevant to what Hope is talking about at the time, if it's, you know, a clarification of something she's talking about, you will see my face pop up again, and I will interrupt her to get the clarification. Otherwise, I will stay muted, and questions will be asked at the end. So it's all yours, Hope. Can you share again?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, or good night if you're in Poland. Yeah, probably she's joining this right before bed, because then she can just go right to sleep if it's really boring. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. All right, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'm going on mute.
All right, so as Jackie already said, today we're going to be talking about animal welfare in the small flock. I would say 75 to maybe 80, 90, even 90% of my work is with the commercial side, but I do have some contact with backyard flocks. But that is why we also have, well, Jackie obviously is very knowledgeable in backyard flocks, but I have my coworker from Penn State on also, Emily Shoup, and she is the Penn State kind of expert for backyard flocks. So if there's going to be questions pertaining kind of to specific production or raising issues, she will be able to help me with those. So I got my Bachelor of Science in Animal Science with a poultry emphasis from the University of Minnesota. I'm currently working on my master's in animal welfare, ethics, and law from the University of Edinburgh. And obviously that's all online. I'm not in Scotland right now. I finished all my courses and I'm working on my thesis right now, which has to do with turkey poults and using a nightlight or not. I previously worked in the commercial layer industry. Also worked on a study that compared different types of layer housing types. And for about 5 years worked as an animal welfare auditor, and then joined Penn State in August of 2019. So what we're going to talk about is kind of a brief definition of animal welfare. Then we're going to go into the 5 freedoms and explain which different things might be an issue for backyard flocks that would fit within those categories. And again, some kind of overlap. Then we're going to talk a little bit about stress and predation, and then at the end have time for questions and answers. And I apologize, I'm working from home right now. My dog may bark occasionally. I thought he was asleep all morning, and now he seems to be hearing something outside. So I apologize in advance. So here, first we're going to say, what is animal welfare? So there's a lot of different definitions. This is kind of a simplistic one for our purposes. Welfare scientists would go into much more detail than this, but we don't really need to do that for our purposes today. But it is often based on the 5 freedoms from the Farm Animal Welfare Council. And these are the freedom from hunger and thirst, the freedom from discomfort, the freedom from pain, injury, and disease, the freedom to express normal behavior, and the freedom from fear and distress. One of the things that welfare scientists kind of have an issue with is that these are pretty much, except for the freedom to express normal behavior, these are all kind of bad things that we're trying to avoid, which is good, but you also want to sort of think about providing a good life for the birds. It also requires disease prevention, veterinary treatment, appropriate shelter, management, appropriate nutrition, humane handling, and humane slaughter or euthanasia. We must provide for the animal's physical and mental needs. Our perspectives are really influenced by a person's values and experiences. So we all, even all of us, you know, that work with chickens or have chickens, probably have a little bit different view about this. And there's a lot of different ways of measuring welfare, but these all include health, productivity, behavior, and physiological responses. So a veterinarian would probably say that health is the most important indicator of welfare. If that bird is healthy, then you know it probably is having good welfare. A commercial like Tyson or someone would probably say that, you know, as long as their broilers are being productive, they have good welfare. An ethologist would probably say that if a bird is showing its natural behaviors, that it has good welfare. Really, in my opinion, is that it's a combination of all of these that indicate whether an animal has good or poor welfare. And one slide that I didn't put in here that I should have is that it's important to recognize that animal welfare is based on the feelings of the animal. And obviously they can't tell us how they're feeling, but it's not what our feelings about the situation are. And I always use my dog as a good example. So my dog is an inside dog, you know, except for going outside for potty or walks or playing. He sleeps on the couch. He sometimes sleeps in the bed. He has like a whole basket overflowing with toys. He has a good diet. He gets treats. He has a good dog life, but he does not like to be alone. He doesn't even like to be alone for an hour when I go to the grocery store. So my point of view is that he has very good welfare. He gets to lay on the couch and sleep all day when I go to work. He can just hang out. He has a nice, warm, cozy bed, and you know, the house is heated or air conditioned. But from his point of view, being left alone, he's not experiencing good welfare during that time. So that's really kind of something we need to consider. It matters what the animal is I kind of have thinking in quotes, but thinking or experiencing. And also we don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that there are no potential welfare issues in a backyard flock. Because obviously commercial industry gets kind of the bad rap of, you know, they're putting too many chickens in the cage, or they're doing this or they're doing that. But really, while the issues might not be the same as those that commercial flocks face, backyard flocks do have their own set of challenges. So the first one we're going to talk about is the freedom from hunger and thirst. Obviously, I'm sure that everyone that has backyard chickens or pet chickens are feeding their birds, but many flock owners feed a mix of commercial feed and chicken scraps. Some people actually don't feed them at all, and they just let them range, which is definitely not recommended. You also need to be careful about what kind of scraps and treats you're giving them, and it shouldn't be a large percentage of their diet. Obviously, they need to have fresh, clean water provided at all times. They may, because of the abundance of food or treats, they may be prone to obesity, and this can cause lots of issues such as metabolic diseases. And if they're just doing like free ranging, or if they're getting a lot of treats and not eating necessarily the prepackaged feed, they can be prone to vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So commercially available feeds do provide an optimal diet with the treats and stuff on the side. The next freedom we're going to talk about is the freedom from discomfort. Housing is a big part of that. Obviously, shelter provides protection from the weather, such as rain, wind, and extreme temperatures. If they're exposed a lot to these the outdoor conditions, they also are at a higher risk for contracting disease. The space provided per hen varies, and the research is not totally conclusive on what's required, but the birds at a minimum should be able to at least stand, lie down, turn 180 degrees, and flap their wings without having to hit another bird unless they want, they want to. External parasites can also be a problem. They're obviously backyard flocks are outside often, and they're at a higher risk of contracting parasites, either due to a lack of biosecurity or a lack of knowledge about how to detect them. These include things such as chicken lice, mites, and fleas. When you're looking, you should check under the vent, under the wings, and around the face. Some species of parasites feed more at night, so you might want to check at night with a flashlight in these areas. Bed bugs are starting to actually become a problem on commercial farms. Also, ticks can be a problem. So even though you don't have, a huge flock of thousands of birds, you still need to practice biosecurity, and you still need to monitor your birds. The next freedom we're going to talk about is the freedom from pain, injury, and disease. So we're not going to go into specific diseases necessarily, but some indicators of disease would be lethargy, reduced appetite, ruffled feathers, reduced preening, thermoregulatory behaviors such as either huddling or spreading out, and reduced activity. Compromised birds might congregate in a secluded or protected areas. If they're not feeling well, that's like a protective mechanism for them. Some birds can be sick and still be alert and responsive, but some might be severely depressed depending on the severity of the disease or the type of disease. A healthy chicken, on the other hand, will usually stand holding their head relatively high. They should have round-shaped eyes. The wings should be folded close to the body, should be holding their tail up. Legs should be kind of straight under their body. They should be, preening regularly, and their feathers should be smooth and shiny looking. A sick chicken might sit with its head drawn close to the body. Its eyes may be semi-closed or closed. The feathers will be possibly ruffled or soiled. They might even be unresponsive. The comb and the wattle might regress and be paler than the normal red color. The skin or shanks might be paler, or they also might have a darker than normal comb or wattles with dry skin, which could indicate dehydration, or dark purple comb and wattles. They might also just be failing to thrive. They might limp or be lame. They might have respiratory issues, and they might have a pasted vent. And a lot of these are all indicators of several different diseases. So we're not going to really go into that today, but just these are the things you want to look out for to make sure that your chickens are healthy. Some other things that can cause problems are aggression or injurious pecking, lead exposure, handling, and euthanasia. Aggression and pecking can be common in backyard flocks. It can range from mild feather pecking to cannibalism, which I'm told is now called persecution. But anyway, pecking or eating each other. Some causes of this could be poor housing design, housing different age groups together, having kind of like nothing in the environment to stimulate them, having too bright of a light inside the house, certain nutritional deficiencies, genetics. Some species are more prone to this, or some breeds are more prone to this, and crowding. Egg eating is another issue that can lead to vent pecking. To prevent egg eating, it's good to remove any broken eggs immediately and clean all traces of any spills and collect your eggs several times a day. Lead toxicity is another issue. I didn't really know a lot about this until I started preparing for this presentation, but this, I guess, can happen especially in urban and suburban areas where people are starting to keep chickens, like in the city. I know like a lot of people in Philadelphia actually keep chickens, which is kind of surprising but interesting. This can happen from lead-based paints in housing and bedding, or from contaminated soil. Some signs of this may be muscle weakness, reduced feed intake, weight loss, anemia, and a drop in egg production if they're egg layers. They might not show any signs until they just have an unexpected death. But you can have, at certain laboratories, have your eggs and blood samples tested for lead. If you think that that's an issue, you're seeing these kinds of signs, or if you live in a major city. The next thing we're going to talk about is handling. So chickens, this is different for waterfowl, but overall, I think most of us are probably talking about chickens. Chickens should be caught by both legs and then supported by the breast when held. You should not handle or carry them by only one leg, by the wings, by the neck, or the tail. Obviously, they should never be struck, kicked, hit, or thrown. And also, when you're putting them into cages or enclosures, make sure that you're not like kind of hitting them against the sides or against any equipment. Sometimes you don't mean to, but they'll flap or whatever, and they can actually injure themselves that way also. And if you have your family involved with your birds, teach children the proper way to handle them. Like the girl in the first picture is doing a good job, while the second picture of the little boy it's an adorable picture, but that's not recommended. Most chickens don't appreciate being squeezed and hugged like that. Also, even though he's got a mask, it's not really a good idea to have your face quite that close to a bird. They do have a lot of diseases. I mean, he's not abusing that bird by any means, but that's really not an ideal situation. The next thing we're going to talk about is euthanasia. So sometimes this kind of upsets people. We're not going to go into too much graphics, but just so you know, we are going to be talking about euthanasia for the next couple minutes. Deciding to euthanize a bird may be a difficult decision. This should be done if a bird is unable to move, unable to eat or drink, and has little to no chance of recovery or is suffering uncontrollable pain. The methods used should comply with the AVMA and be as quick and painless as possible. So some of these are cervical dislocation, which is a recommended procedure for small flocks, decapitation, gas inhalation, which is not usually used on a small scale, electrocution, same thing, captive bolt, which may or may not be used. Usually that's used more with turkeys or larger birds. Injectable agents, which is like what a veterinarian would do. Manually applied blunt force trauma is not recommended. And a gunshot is not recommended if restraining the bird is possible. That would be more for like your like pheasants and those types of birds that fly. But you don't probably want to shoot your chicken. So cervical dislocation is the one that most people would use on their own flock. This is the technique according to the Humane Slaughter Association. Well, kind of according to everyone that does this. You need to hold the bird's legs in one hand, close to your hip, with the underside of the bird's body against your thigh. Use the first two fingers of your other hand and grab the head immediately behind the skull with your thumb under the beak. Then you'll want to stretch the neck downwards, at the same time pressing your knuckles into the neck vertebrae and pulling the bird's head back. So this should be done in one swift pull. You need to be firm and confident. If you kind of waver or hesitate, it's probably not going to work, and then you'll have to do it again. So it's uncomfortable, it's not fun, but you do want to just, once you start, finish it off, finish the motions, and then check that the bird is dead. You can feel the neck for a gap in the vertebrae. Ensure that the bird is not breathing, or ensure that there's no blink reaction if the eye is touched and that the pupil is dilated. If the bird is not dead, repeat the procedure as quickly as possible, because you don't want it to suffer, while it's waiting to die. It probably will still flop around for a little bit. That's okay. That's just, a natural reflex. But as long as that vertebrae is severed, that bird is euthanized. And this is more for a larger operations, but be wary of fatigue. You should only do a few birds at a time. If you're trying to do a lot of birds, you'll get tired and you won't be able to, follow through as well. And training is really essential. If you're not comfortable doing this, it's probably better that you don't, just because you want, to make sure that it's done properly. The next freedom we're going to talk about is the freedom to express normal behavior. This is something that is often perceived as better in a backyard or a small flock compared to commercial operations. And that's probably correct in many cases. They should be able to express the normal behaviors such as feeding, drinking, nesting, foraging, preening, perching, dust bathing, and flocking. The house or coop should be designed appropriately so that these behaviors can be performed. For layers, this would include perches and nest boxes, also some substrate or yard to forage or dust bathe in. It's ideal if all the birds have the space to eat at the same time so that the more dominant ones don't get, always get the first choice to feed. And they should all, this is for layers, but they should all have enough perches so that they can all roost at the same time at night. There's lots and lots of studies that show that chickens do want to roost. And if they're not roosting at night, it's usually because there's not space for them. They are highly motivated to perch. So it's good if there's enough space for all of them to do that. The next one we're going to talk about is the freedom from fear and distress. So some things that are associated with this would be the social hierarchy or the pecking order that we've all heard about, predation, and just general causes of stress. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about stress. What is stress? That refers to environmental factors that can affect an animal. It also refers to the effects on the animal, which are assumed to be harmful. But we're going to use the working definition that stress is a biological response elicited when an individual perceives a threat to its homeostasis. So this is the steady conditions in the body or the optimal conditions. The threat is the stressor. And when the stress response threatens an animal's well-being, the animal experiences distress. Now, all stress is not necessarily harmful. It's generally accepted that mild stress is actually beneficial. It stimulates the animal's bodily system and helps develop and stimulate their mental processes. Not all stress causes fear, but physiologically, an animal often does experience stress concurrent with fear. And fear is considered a state of suffering. So this obviously goes wrong with the 5 freedoms that we're talking about, the freedom from fear and distress. And one thing is that individual birds, like people, differ in their fear response. So some things might scare one bird and not another. It just really depends. Some indicators of stress at the flock level would be changes in feed or water intake, decreased growth, decreased production, increased mortality, increased morbidity or diseases, the position of animals in the group, such as baby chicks huddling if they're cold, vocalization, or even especially the lack of it, if they're very quiet, that could indicate that they're stressed. And all of these are also indicators of certain diseases as well. So if you've talked with a vet or an expert and you don't think you're having any disease issues, there could be something that's just causing stress to the flock. So this is useful for flock-based interventions. And one thing is kind of important to remember, probably not as much for backyard or small flocks, but individual birds can experience problems even if the flock is healthy overall. So maybe most of the birds are fine, but there can be some that are experiencing this. Social hierarchy is another thing that can cause stress for birds. Under natural conditions, chickens form groups with one male and several females. Birds can recognize each other in a small group and form a hierarchy or a pecking order. The subordinates usually avoid the dominants whenever possible. And this is usually worked out pretty well in a smaller flock, but it can be a problem if you introduce more birds or if you have a lot of, like, I don't know what the exact number would be, but if you have such a large group that they can't recognize all of each other, it's kind of them always trying to decide their pecking order. It's kind of interesting to note that hens can suppress aggression amongst their chicks, kind of like they say the phrase mother hen. They actually are good at doing that. And roosters can actually suppress it amongst the hens. And as I said before, it's lower in small stable groups. It's higher in medium-sized groups, and then actual aggression is lower again in very large groups because there's too many for them to actually figure out who is what, but they still can be experiencing stress even if there's not a lot of aggression. And obviously contact with strange or new birds can cause stress. So if you add new ones to the flock, which happens occasionally, there can be a period of time where it causes stress for everyone in the flock. Predation is also an issue. Some common predators include dogs, coyotes, bobcats, house cats, foxes, raccoons, weasels or their family members, skunks, possums, snakes, hawks, or owls. And this just depends kind of where you live in the country, or even in the state, or just what's even in your neighborhood, really. So to avoid predation, you should really keep your flocks inside at night. Keeping them inside during the day can also help avoid predation, but that may interfere with some of the other freedoms that we mentioned. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons if you think the overall benefit of having them outside and being able to explore and do their natural behaviors is more important than the chance that they might become lunch for some type of predator. You can use fencing, either electrified or non-electrified. The electrified I thought this was interesting. Actually, I got a lot of this from the University of Kentucky website. If you go on there, or Jackie might have the link. But the electrified fence should actually stun and not kill the predator. And that's because if it kills the predator, a new one of the same species will just kind of come and take over the territory. But if it stuns the one that's already there, then it will just kind of scare it into not coming back. And I had never thought of that before. And that's actually really interesting. You would want to bury your fence down at least a foot and then go out from the coop another foot, so that if there's the digging types of predators, they dig themselves into a corner and can't get underneath. If you're able to cover your runs from above, that's good for aerial predators such as hawks and owls. You can use net or fishing line. You can also get game cameras nowadays if you're trying to figure out what type of predator you have, and put those out and review those and see what's getting into your coop. You might be able to use live traps, but you again need to check if this is legal. You can use guard dogs such as like a Great Pyrenees. That's my parents' dog, the first picture. She's not a guard dog, she's just a pet. But the thing with them is that they need to stay with the flock at all times. They can't be sort of like a dog that comes inside when it wants and goes back out with the flock when it wants to, because then, it won't be offering all the protection. You can use extra lights, but also if you have layers, especially, you want to be careful with that because you might disrupt their egg laying cycle with that. And if you're just really having a hard time, you can try to contact your state game commission for manual removal. And I just showed a couple of pictures like this, the middle picture. That fence probably isn't keeping too much out, in my opinion. I think most different types of animals could probably get through that. Now, maybe they live in an area where they're not having issues, or maybe they have a dog that's not in the photo. I don't know, but that's probably not going to keep too many things out. The second one is a little bit more sturdy. It goes up higher. I'm not sure if he has a net over the top, but that would definitely be a better example if you're trying to keep things out of your coop. So for some aerial predators such as raptors and corvids, what you want to do is remove any isolated trees or perching areas within 100 yards of the coop. But again, you need to balance this with the welfare issues of having shade for your birds. Keep the birds inside at night, cover the runs. You can try to use owl or coyote decoys. I think sometimes certain predators kind of wise up to this, but again, you can try. And then again, provide cover. So like, even if maybe you can't cover the whole run, have places like small shelters that if they can't get back to the coop, they can run it underneath that instead. Snakes can also be an issue. I'm not sure that they usually take large birds necessarily, but they'll take, pullets or chicks or eggs maybe. But you'd want to remove any debris or piles of wood near the coop. That's also good for your biosecurity. And eliminate any tall grass or brush near the coop. weasels, opossums, and raccoons can be really hard to keep out. You want to use hardware cloth over any ventilation openings and fill and repair any holes, even if they're very small. Like they can actually get through a lot smaller hole than you think they could. You can use double fencing. You can maybe use traps if that's legal. You can use electric fencing at the bottom of the pens for raccoons or motion sensor lights. But again, that might interrupt your layer cycle. There's, I guess, special raccoon-proof latches, and also you want to remove and secure all trash from the area, because sometimes they just want to come after the chicken feed or the smashed eggs or whatever might be out there. So it would help also if you just get rid of that kind of stuff also. Foxes are also can be difficult. They can easily climb fences. You want to secure your garbage again and keep it away from the coop. You might try to bury hardware cloth around the perimeter of the coop. Apparently electric fences don't work well for them. One thing I heard was that you can try to disturb their travel pattern so they don't travel next to the coop. But if you've got foxes coming in, you might want to try and consult with a professional, because they can be a little bit difficult. Dogs are also can be an issue, whether it's your dogs or your neighbor's dogs. They often kill birds but don't eat them. If you don't know what's getting your chickens, but you see a large number of birds that are killed and scattered around but not eaten, it might be, your neighbor's dog. You can try and report this to animal control. You can try to use fencing with a dig bar or some type of visual barrier on it. You can try using citronella or pepper spray, but this can be an issue because if it's somebody's pet dog, obviously I'm a huge dog lover. I would never recommend harming somebody else's dog anyway, but you also can be legally liable if you harm a dog. So you might want to talk to your local animal control or your city, or even just talk to your neighbors. Maybe they don't know their dog's getting into your coop. Coyotes often snatch free roaming birds. They're most active at night, but they're also often seen during the day. Motion lights or sprinklers or electrified fencing might help. Bears are probably only a problem in certain areas, but they're obviously capable of shredding chicken wire or bird netting. You need a very secure coop made of high strength materials. You want to remove any trash or chicken feed or other attractants in the area. You might try to use motion lights or sprinklers or electric fencing. Honestly, I'm not really sure how much any of this would work if you've got bears that are used to coming around. It might be that having backyard chickens just isn't the right place in that area. But that's my opinion. Obviously, you can try any of these other things. So yeah, this is just kind of my wrap up slide. So remember, people like you guys that have the backyard or the smaller flocks have a really unique opportunity, because it's not like a commercial flock that has hundreds of thousands of birds, but you get to know your birds on an individual level, and some might even have names or be more like your family pets. Even if you have a larger backyard flock, you don't have the same number that a commercial flock has, and you can inspect or look at those birds more readily. And we really do appreciate you guys attending webinars like this, because it does show that you care about your birds and that you want to, provide a good environment for them. And you can reach out to us at Penn State or Kentucky if you have any questions or concerns, or if anything comes up, or if you want to suggest a topic for a different webinar, we'd be happy to do that. Those are just my references that I use. And I guess now we can take questions. And I have Emily on here. Emily, I think I said, is my colleague who is the backyard chicken specialist. I am not very good about answering if you want to know a specific diet for this breed of chicken at this age. I'm not really the person to ask. But that's why I have Emily, and well, Jackie obviously is on here too, so we can hopefully answer any of the questions that you do have.
Thanks. You can put it in the chat box, or you can put it in the Q&A box if you have any questions.
I'm just going to put my first slide up there with my contact info. Okay. But I'm sure you guys all have it, Jackie's and she can always get it to you also.
I'm going to go ahead and drop our online course in the chat as well. That's offered by Penn State Extension. We also have one for small flocks. This one's probably better suited for this audience, though. It's raising poultry in your backyard.
So a lot of people think that, you know, small flocks don't have a problem, but they can't. So we have a question. Can I put 2 ducks in with my 10 chickens?
I would say that's not great for biosecurity, but people do this. So I'm going to defer to Emily. My first thought, because it came out of the commercial industry, is no, please don't do that. But it's a little bit different when I'll let Emily and Jackie take that.
It depends on the type of housing, the type of ducks, and the type of chickens. Ducks tend to have much wetter manure and can cause more of a problem, you know, for the ammonia and different smells in the poultry house. So from biosecurity is also not a good idea. Emily, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, in my childhood, raised a lot of chickens and ducks together with varied success. Before I got my fancy education and realized that that was not the best thing to do for biosecurity, we raised a lot of chickens and ducks together. My big problem with it was when we were brooding ducklings and baby chicks. Sometimes my chicks would attack my ducks. My ducks were so tender-hearted that they didn't fare well against some of my dad's chickens. So especially when they're younger, unless they're raised together, some of those chicks can be a little aggressive towards the ducks, and vice versa, just depending, like Jackie said, on the breed. I definitely wouldn't raise Muscovies with any kind of chickens. They typically be very, very aggressive and pretty dangerous to other birds and to humans sometimes. So that would be my advice on that one.
It also depends if a rooster is there, because roosters can be protective and might go after it. So any suggestions for flea, tick, lice removal or prevention? Are dog flea drops acceptable? No.
Yeah, I don't think so. I only know what we do in the commercial, and it's probably not. What do you?
There are pesticides that are approved for poultry. These should have them in your feed stores that you can use. But a dog flea medication is specific for dogs, not for birds, especially any birds that are producing eggs. That's
yeah, because aren't a lot of them, they're not approved, like you can't eat the eggs then, right?
Right, there is anything that's used off label, what dog flea drops on chickens would be, that's off label because it's not approved. There are no given withdrawal times or egg discard times because it's not approved. So if you're keeping laying hens, don't use medications that are not approved for poultry.
Just if you can't find one of those things at your local feed store, or if you're not sure what to use, a lot of times when we're looking at feather mites or those depluming mites, you can pull those feathers out and that can kind of reduce the infection until you can find or locate one of those topical pesticides that can eliminate the problem. I know my dad's raising some crested birds right now that have the big fluffy hair, and they are really he's really struggling to keep mites out of that because there's feed that gets impacted in those crests. Once they drink water, they go to eat feed, they just get really dirty. And the mites just seem to love that. So he's been experimenting with some different types of pesticides, which is probably not I don't know that all of them are approved, so I won't give those name brands or suggestions, but he's a show person, so they tend to go a little off the rails. I don't recommend that, but he's also not saving those eggs. So
He's doing it as a purebred, not as a laying hen.
yeah,
The use of a dust bath, especially something like sand, could help to prevent them, keep them down to a minimum if you have a dust bath bathing area. So what about keeping your feed safe, biosecure from rats, mice, and wild birds? Any suggestions?
I got a good one for that. Metal storage tubs. So
I was
metal
even
trash
gonna
cans.
say that. I'm like, not just the bag that it came in, you know, open.
Yeah. Yep. Making sure that you're storing those in airtight containers or some kind of storage tub. We store chick feed in our in like, what are they called? Ice cream pails because it's small, it's easy to carry from pen to pen. My dad actually uses those large Rubbermaid trash cans that are really thick, hard to chew through. He uses that for manure storage and feed storage. Make sure you wash them in between. But that keeps your feed fresh, and it also tends to keep those varmints out of your feed.
Right. Yeah, metal is always better. Any other questions? Got a couple more minutes if you want to ask any questions. I put in the chat the link to a past webinar that we did on managing predators with small backyard poultry flock. And they had, we had speakers from different regions, Colorado or Arizona, I can't remember, Arizona, I think, California, Pennsylvania, I can't remember what, I think Minnesota as well. So different predators in different regions. So that's always a good webinar to see what's in your area as well. So all of our webinars are recorded, and the recordings are available. I did put in a link for our past webinars. I also put in a link for our Facebook page, which we do a lot of advertising for webinars, as well as updates and news. And I think in terms of news, Minnesota has an outbreak of avian influenza, low path H5 though, in some turkeys, I think. So that's being, any small flocks in those areas are being tested, and so far nothing new has come up, just one flock. Commercial poultry routinely test their birds for avian influenza before they go to market. So that's how they find those things. Tractor Supply put in a thing for catching, great for helping with rats. It's always, thanks for sharing, Shannon. Oh, new messages that came in. Jackie, what's up for February? February is pasture grazing with multiple species, including poultry. So that should be an interesting one. I originally had scheduled it for June, but the speaker's not available in June, so he switched with me, and he'll be doing his in February. So grazing with, cattle, goats, pigs, chickens, how do you do that? Or do you do that type things?
We have a lot of that out. I live in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, which is a lot of Amish people. And a lot of them will do that. It's kind of cute. They're not exactly neighbors. They're about a mile down the road, but they have their chickens go out with their sheep. And sometimes like the little baby lambs are hopping along and the chickens. But yeah, again, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know that much about it. So maybe I'll have to join and see.
Well,
yeah, that's we get a ton of questions about, especially in my inbox. I get a lot of questions about, can I graze this with this? And what do I graze them on? Pasture mixes and things like that. That'll be a good one. I'll have to send my agronomy folks to that.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Ray is not a poultry specialist, but he does do a lot of lectures on grazing per se. So I'll help him with it too. So how much time each day does a healthy egg-laying flock need for care each day? Is this twice a day or more? Trying to plan a vacation before considering a flock of 4 birds.
Well, I would say at least once a day. Twice a day is probably good. What do you guys usually do, Emily, on your farm? I know commercially and audits and stuff for big farms, it's usually twice a day is like what we usually go by.
Yeah, I would say twice a day at minimum, just because for 4 birds, maybe you don't have to go more than twice a day. But so my dad just retired as of yesterday, but he used to work a rotating swing shift. So he has a ton of birds and would see them about every 3 days. He has automatic waterers that are of a scale that he can handle that they can support that capacity, automatic feeders as well. He's in the process of ripping all of that out now because he doesn't need that much capacity. So yeah, I think it's kind of the amount of work that you want to put into it. If you want to have a good relationship with those birds and make sure that their welfare is taken care of and that they have all those points that Hope discussed, yeah, you can check on them 18 times a day if you want. But for vacations, it's just nice to have somebody on retainer. I know my parents do that with our local 4-H club. They have kids come over and check out those birds and make sure everybody's good to go. The big thing there is just making sure that there's nothing flooded or some kind of predator got in. We've had both of those issues when my parents have been on vacation, and it's not fun to come home to. So yeah, just making sure that you have somebody there to check on them at least once a day while you're on vacation. But I don't think you need to necessarily plan your whole life around your birds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it depends on how long your vacation is and what kind of housing. I mean, if they're running around free range, you want to make sure that they're in at night. So you need somebody to let them out and bring them, put them back in. If they're in total confinement and the run is covered to prevent predators, then, once a day is probably good enough. For egg pickup, it's usually better twice a day. But if you're only on vacation for, 3 or 4 days, once a day is fine. And if you're going to go a little longer, then, maybe don't worry about the eggs.
Especially if you're going away in the summer. I know there were some days this year that my dad's barn is heated and air conditioned, but he had a small flock of laying hens outside that he did not even bother to save those eggs because they had been outside in 100-degree temperatures, and he just didn't want to risk it. So he just tossed them out into the woods.
Yeah. So it depends on a lot of things. So with 4 birds, you should be able to take good care of them, 10, 15 minutes in the morning, 10, 15. I know that when we had poultry, we had a lot more than 4. We had to do it before school and after. So
yeah, that's how it is here with our beef cattle. We don't eat till they eat. So I think that's always good for kiddos too. It's a good way to teach some responsibility.
Yeah. I don't know that I appreciated it at the time, but
I don't think I did either.
Okay, any more questions? Seeing none, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for Emily and of course Hope for giving the presentation and answering questions. It was much appreciated. As I said, this is recorded. It should be up later today or early tomorrow, depending on how much free time I get to get this done. And hopefully we'll see you next week. It's the 1st February, so it is February the 1st Tuesday, sorry. Hopefully you can join us for that and learn about pastures. So thank you, everybody. Everybody have a good evening. Stay safe. Thanks, Hope and Emily.
Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thank you, Emily. I recruited Emily last minute because, well, I knew that Jackie could answer, obviously, but